You guys got it. I did not. If you listen to the rest of this episode, you guys are right. Game 5 was a complete wash. And the Oilers are on to the Stanley Cup Finals once again. We don't even have the intro. It's been great watching the Eastern Conference, Western Conference Finals in the NHL and NBA. Yesterday was surprising, to say the least, I think, in my opinion. Not necessarily the result, just the way that it all went down. Justin, we'll go to you. Any just thoughts on the game quickly before we get into anything specific?
Yeah, overall in the game, I was shocked that Edmonton got out to a 3-0 lead so early. Obviously, like McDavid said, like you get out to a 3-0 lead that early, like it's still only like 55 minutes or still 55 minutes left in the game. Basically, like you still have to defend, right? Like, and that might be a challenging part. Like on a full honesty, you're up 3-0, you're feeling comfortable, but like there's still that much time left in the game, and like you might be, you play defensive minded for the rest of the game, but no, in the second period. Dallas makes it a 1-goal game, and McDavid scores an McDavid-esque goal, which was like, I like to describe that goal. It was like remarkable what he did, and then like, did you guys like find? I found this like kind of cool, like the edge work that he showed like right against like Casey DeSmith there at the end, and not to like fall or like do any like it was like incredible. Like I like. Just like the way he's able to control his body, I just was like, wow. Was that you guys as well?
Yeah, I think Frege put out a tweet that said that was probably the most impressive part of that whole goal. I mean, it was great. He did exactly what he's supposed to do as the leader of that team. He, in maybe an uncomfortable situation, he was able to break through and take an opportunity that he had. Some other players would get that breakaway and maybe fumble the puck or not be able to put it in the right spot. But he did miss, and he beat DeSmith cleanly. And whether or not he should have been in the net is a whole other topic that I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, no, it was great to see Edmonton break through and kind of take advantage of the moment and be able to push, their way to a second straight Stanley Cup final, which is just exciting for the country, for the city, for anyone who's a fan of hockey, really, when it comes to Connor McDavid, hopefully getting his first Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
The 5-3 goal was really the killer. Like, I know that people thought like maybe, everyone thought maybe like the 4-2-1 kind of iced the game. I thought when Dallas came out and scored that early one in the third period, I was like, this is not over. Like,
100%.
They have a chance here. And then that 5-3 goal, like you said, weird bounce on that one. That kind of like sealed it for me. I'm like, yeah, this is over at this point. Like,
yeah,
Edmonton is advancing to the Stanley Cup final for the second year in a row, which is just, if we would have told, like, if any of us would have predicted that at the beginning of the year, like, we wouldn't have thought it, because simply, like, we discussed it yesterday about like what's the hardest thing to do, like in like, or the hardest sport to win in, basically, and to have like a rematch of a championship in the NHL, it's like it's nearly impossible to predict, because like it's so hard to get to the Stanley Cup final, let alone repeat in the Stanley Cup final. So yeah, it's just incredible to see these two teams like get there and have a rematch. It's the first rematch since Detroit and Pittsburgh in 08 and 09. So like I said, not common.
That's a funny comment, because I was listening to Spit and Chicklets, their latest episode, and Ryan Whitney had a really interesting tweet where I think that was the year. So Crosby was there, and he won his first cup in 09 after losing the year prior. And I'm pretty sure Gretzky did the same thing back in 83-84 with the Islanders, and then Edmonton winning. So it would be pretty poetic justice, like if McDavid gets it done.
Itself. It's right. The book is writing itself.
And I just, we'll talk about the matchup, but obviously we're sticking with Edmonton. Like, I'd be hard pressed to pick against McDavid this time around. And again, like I said, we can chat about predictions quickly, but it was just interesting seeing that team. And touching on whether we'd thought about it at the beginning of the season, I think I'd be more inclined to say I'd like to see Florida again, even though they'd already made 2 cup finals. Just the way the team plays and the way they're built, they're very depth heavy. And not to say Edmonton wasn't, but I feel like that was such an emotional Stanley Cup Finals last year, where you go down 3-0 and then you will your way back. And I don't know how many people thought they'd have a chance to win in Game 7. I was still thinking like there's no chance Florida gives this up, but to get there is impressive. And after that emotional letdown, like you saw in NHL Face-Off, like McDavid, and you saw the team after they lost and how dejected they were. And obviously that's fuel for motivation, but it's like, how do you get back up and drag yourself into an 82-game season the next year? And like, how does any of this matter? It clearly didn't. Both teams that are in the Stanley Cup Finals were 3 seeds. So clearly it's just about getting there to the dance, and then you kind of just figure it out when you're there. And that's what we're seeing from these two teams.
Yeah, like the one thing like I'll say on Edmonton in terms of like the moment compared to this year or last year compared to this year. Last year it seemed like obviously new to them. They didn't really know. Last night it kind of McDavid spoke to it, like the moment doesn't seem too big for them this year. Like it feels more natural that they're in this situation. They play these big time games. The first time they make it to the Western Conference Finals, they get rolled over by Colorado in 2022, and then last year they make it past the Western Conference Finals, and the moment seemed a little bit too big on the biggest stage, the Stanley Cup Final for them. And then this year it just seems more calmness around the team, more, maturity is, I guess, the word that's going around. Like it feels like this team is naturally built for this right now, this time of year, I should say.
Yeah.
I know I wanted to go into, before we just go into the matchup on Florida, I know I wanted to go into DeBoer here for 1 minute. What did you guys make of his comments last night?
I think we got to talk about the actual decision before we talk about the comments,
oh, yeah,
right?
True.
Basically, the idea that Ottinger gets pulled after 2 shots go in, so Oilers are up 2-0 within 10 minutes of the game, not even.
Oh, it was like 3 or 4.
Yeah. I know it was very early, and Ottinger's gone, and I remember looking at the TV like, my god.
The thing was, it wasn't clear.
Wait, what do you mean?
Like, they called the timeout, right? He calls the timeout, and like Ottinger's they're skating away from the timeout, and Ottinger's going back to the net. And it wasn't clear until like Peter DeBoer just yells like, "Get out! You're out.
Done."
You're done." And like it just was not clear to anyone. Like no one on the broadcast, and no one even like thought it was happening until like when Jake Ottinger's skating down the tunnel, like, and Casey DeSmith seemed to be the only one knew that he was going into the net. Like it was kind of crazy. Unless you guys like assumed like out of that timeout, like he was already being pulled. Like I don't know.
No, I thought he was calling timeout. I thought it was a smart timeout at the moment.
I
like
did
try
too.
to give your team a chance. But yeah, I think there was like some miscommunication. Either Ottinger didn't hear him, maybe when he was dressing him kind of at, room, typical room volume. And then, he tries to go back to the net, and then you see him turn around and come out. And it was an awkward situation for sure. And if I don't know if you guys saw, but on the TNT broadcast, they had Ray Ferraro in between the benches, and he was stationed pretty much right beside Ottinger, and he was obviously tasked with breaking down what the situation was. And there were some photos circulating of Ottinger with his eyes closed, his head kind of down, and Ferraro right there, obviously speaking about him and the challenges that he had. So it was definitely an awkward and difficult moment for the Otter, and for, I'm sure, DeBoer in that moment, trying to rack his brain in terms of what can I do to get my team back into this series when we're in the biggest hole you can pretty much have. So it was one of those things, but then the conversation, I feel like, switched. Dallas gets back into the game a little bit, and at least again on the TNT broadcast, which I was watching, they continued to ask the question of, would you put Ottinger back in? And I think that's a natural question.
Game 6 or during the game?
During the game, like, would you put him back in at 3-2 going into the third period? Should they had kept that deficit, or if they get it back to, obviously it was 4-2 going into the third, but they score that early goal. It's like, well, what do you like? You're at this point where you can't give up another goal in your season. Yeah. And then they do. And I know it wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't put any of those, the McDavid goal or the goal in the third period that bounced off his own defender's skate. Like, realistically, there's not much you can do about that, but it is interesting to think, like, if Ottinger stays in that game, does he keep it to 4 goals? And then, your team's right there. So it's just one of those crazy things. But Justin, you go ahead with the post-game comments, because I know they were definitely interesting as well. It didn't feel like he was doing his own squad any favors there.
Yeah, well, we assume we'll take. We talked about Rod Brindamore yesterday, talking about maybe not or like would he get fired? I don't think so. I think Peter DeBoer is probably on bigger of a hot seat than he is, and especially after last night's comments, he wasted no time going after his team in that loss. Like no time at all. Threw his number one goalie under the bus by a quote that was pretty damning in the moment, and it just not like it just has stuck with everyone in, I guess, the hockey world in like the last 12 hours because that was the quote of the night for sure. It was, I didn't blame it all on Jake, but the reality is if you go back to last year's playoffs, he's lost 6 of 7 games to Edmonton, and we give up 2 goals on 2 shots in an elimination game. That's a pretty big sample size. That's a pretty damning and strong quote from Peter DeBoer, and it did not stop there on the night. There was another quote where he was asked, like, did you think that you guys were the better team? And he's like, no, the 2 better teams are playing in the Stanley Cup Final right now. We were not the better team at all. Edmonton was the better team. Just basically taking shots at his own team right after a Game 5 loss, has the option basically to defend them, not like throw them. Like say like yes, Edmonton was the better team, but we fought hard. We didn't like give up. Like has the option to do that. No. He went right at his team and let them know in the media basically that he was not happy, especially with Jake Ottinger. And I don't know how you repair that relationship now going forward if you're the Dallas Stars and Jake Ottinger. And Jake Ottinger's not leaving, right? He just signed a massive extension, so maybe it's DeBoer.
Well, but I do think it's fair to question, not necessarily in that moment, and then maybe not from that specific mouth, but I think that there is now, with the way that this Dallas core and group has continued to kind of flame out in these big moments, it is worth asking the question of whether or not, is it the roster itself? Is it just the coach or maybe Ottinger's not, built for these moments? I know Justin, a couple weeks back, you had him penciled in, it seemed like, at the Olympics for the U.S. But at this point, like, you don't really know. It feels like what he is in those big moments. He's clearly a great regular season goalie and has had some great moments in early rounds of the playoffs. But you get to a conference final 2 years in a row, and he's outplayed by Stuart Skinner in both of those series. So that is disappointing, and it only takes one great series in a conference final or a Stanley Cup final to cement yourself as a playoff player, but he's yet to do that. So I think whether you want to look at the group up front, obviously there's a bit of an aging core, not necessarily core there, but some of their older players have been around for a long time and have yet to kind of break through with this group. So
you gotta feel for Jamie Benn.
Yeah, Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, these kind of guys who have been there and helped bring along this new group of guys, but haven't really been the reason or been part of the reason why they've been able to break through into a cup final. I think they did make a cup final way back
2020.
Dallas, or sorry, Tampa.
And they lost right before
6 games, I believe.
So they've been there. I think they've just haven't done themselves any favors in terms of creating any kind of long-term success or belief that they can get back there. So I mean, early going into the playoffs, I had them as a team to make the Stanley Cup Final. I really thought this was the year that they were going to break through. But I don't think anybody going into the playoffs saw, first off, the switch, it seems like, flip for Edmonton, and that they get healthy and they've gone on a complete roll since losing those first 2 games in LA. It's just been a completely different team. And then Dallas, it seemed like they were going the other way, where they had they were kind of getting guys back, but you could tell they weren't 100%, and they were kind of almost taking steps backwards because they were maybe, disrupting the group that had got them through the first round, or trying to change their style to allow other players that were coming back, like Heiskanen and Robertson, to kind of try to find their game, in the playoffs, which is a tough thing to do. So I think once they got up against a team like Edmonton, who was just rolling, it's going to be tough to knock that down.
Yeah. With Ottinger, you talk about, Brandon, how, especially as a goalie, you can cement yourself as like a playoff performer really within a couple of series. I think it's the exact same as if you were to perform poorly. You at least see Connor
Sure.
Hellebuck, who we discussed earlier this year. It only really takes 2 back-to-back poor performances in the playoffs for people to start questioning your ability to play in big pressure moments. Now, I'm not saying Jake Ottinger's there, but I pulled up his stats this morning because I knew that this would be a conversation. And in the Western Conference Finals, he's been there as the main goalie of record for 3 straight years.
Right.
And he has a 5-11 record with a 3.29 goals against average and a save percentage of below 900. It's actually 881. So there's a couple games where he's been pulled, right, or he's come in relief, but not ideal. And still a very young kid, but he is a guy who's obviously the number 1 goalie by far. It was weird last night. I feel like if you let in maybe a third goal, things change. Like if there's 3 goals in the first period, which ended up happening, obviously the third one with Casey DeSmith, but maybe the third goal is when you make that change. It was a really short leash, but maybe DeBoer had a conversation with Otter before being like, hey man, like we need this. And if you're not feeling it early, maybe we have to go that route. It didn't seem that way, the way you can see Jake like just upset. And I would be too, if you're that, you're tasked with holding the fort down, and immediately the floodgates open. I mean, I'm not surprised Edmonton won. I'm surprised, like I said earlier, in the fashion that it took place, where it just seemed like Dallas didn't have their legs the entire night until they were really back against the wall. And at that point, it's like the Leafs with Florida. They gave way less of a fight, but they fought back very minimally when they were down like 5-0. In this case, it was closer, but the game was pretty much out of reach, for the most part.
Yeah.
Just quickly on Edmonton, you guys surprised to see Ekholm in the lineup in Game 5?
No, only because I think that they wanted him to come back and try and, not play his first games in Stanley Cup Finals games, and potentially try and work him back into the lineup. I put out on my other page, I don't even know if you needed Ekholm to win the cup this year.
No.
Their defense, of course, been playing so well together. The Troy Stature was so good.
The cup is interesting. I think this series was pretty much, 3-1.
It was a wrap. It
was a wrap. I would put him in Game 6 if Dallas did win last night. But I think it was more just, let's just see if this team can get it done. You have Jeff Skinner in there who scored his first NHL Stanley Cup goal.
Man, so happy. 300. Did you see the stat? 373 regular season goals, and that's his first playoff goal in the second game.
Good for him for sure. No, I guess that makes sense though. You want to get his legs under him, and even if it's for one game, which it ends up being before the Stanley Cup Finals, at least he can feel what that action's like, and not just hey, here's forechecking Sam
Florida.
Bennett and Reinhart and all those guys.
They're coming for your heads game 1.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where I disagree, Justin. I think they will absolutely need him. I think Stetcher has played great, and I don't necessarily even think that he might. He probably would be the one to come out, but I don't know necessarily that they want to disrupt the lines. That's going. They've obviously played fantastic with that 6 pair or those 6 guys paired up the way that they had them in the first couple of rounds. But I think they're going to need a guy like Ekholm who's elite defensively and can move the puck pretty well. There's no question that if he's healthy and able to play, that he gives them an advantage, because Florida's going to be a completely other beast compared to teams like Dallas, in LA, who they've played earlier. So Vegas, I think, is the closest comparison, but they didn't really give them their best game. So what can you do?
Well, that's just because Edmonton overwhelmed them, I think. But I just meant obviously Ekholm's best defensive player on Edmonton in their roster in general. But I just meant in terms of the way they're playing right now. I don't know if you needed Ekholm to win the cup. Ekholm definitely better player, needs to be in the lineup if he's healthy. I just meant the way that they're playing. I don't even know if you need him to win the cup, basically. But if
they're playing well,
I can understand the reasoning behind needing him with Florida, I guess. Basically, they need a what's the word? Brute force man back
pretty
there,
much.
I guess. To take the load of these hits. And Troy Stetcher maybe is not that guy, and Ekholm's a better fit for that. So yeah.